Hi, everyone, friends and colleagues. I look forward to being back in fall. Uh, I know that time is running, so I'm just sharing this video basically. So here we go. How editing as it's this sort of, well, in a way it's a technology, but it's also a vocabulary. Speaking of, I mean, we could talk about it in Karen Barad's terms, would be like a material discursive sort of thing, right? Like editing is this sort of constellation of technologies and knowledge and also cultural cultural things. So I was really interested in this idea of knowing or not knowing in terms of being open and vulnerable to what you don't know, and sort of how that works with your process or in the process. As you know, we have this thing called practices research, and my portfolio for that is actually this film that I've been working on almost since I began the PhD. And I got to actually shoot most of it here in my hometown in Buenos Aires. And that was at the beginning of 2020, so in January 2020, we began shooting for like 10 days. We wrapped shooting, and then I went back to Vegas. And of course, like a month and a half later, the world had ended. So I, started editing, which was kind of interesting to be editing in that sort of situation. So yeah, I don't think I want to speak chronologically about this. So let's just say, again, I'm trying to point to and go back to the idea of knowing, not knowing. So I went into this film sort of knowing some of the things that knowing a lot of things that I wanted to do with it. One of the most important parts was that I had been, before I started doing this, the feature film, I was doing these shorts, and I actually did all of these that I'm showing you now in Davis. So I was thinking about these as sort of exercises or studies for the film, because what I wanted to do is sort of think of a way to do a story that revolved around human, but also around non-human characters, other than human characters. So that was one of the main ideas. So I did these 3 shorts, they're around 8 minutes each, as a way to sort of try to understand what did like non-human acting was about. One of my main worries and concerns was ventriloquy, making these objects sort of speak for me, or in some way anthropomorphize them, like sort of transmit these human emotions, and sort of they become, in a way, sort of stand-ins for human actions, as we've seen, in so many films, like the teapot and Beauty and the Beast and all of these things. But I also sort of was aware that, it was sort of impossible to not project something onto them. Once you shoot something and it's there, it's very difficult to not, as you watch it, the audience watches it, not to, I don't know, have some kind of reaction, right? That sort of makes sense. So what I ended up kind of discovering, for myself was that there was this other thing that I could use to create story, some kind of meaning, without sort of, again, projecting these specific actions or emotions into the objects. I could just sort of film them, and then through the editing, a story sort of began to emerge. And I wasn't really, I didn't know that would happen. I was just like shooting, a lot of hours and trying out different things. I would leave the camera on and sort of, work with these materials and light things on fire, which was of course very fun. And I would then look at all the footage and put it together. And in a way, it started to weave into a story. And I think that part of that happened because all of us, I think, we've been sort of already trained by so many years of watching TV and films and things like that into, it's almost like intuitive the way that if something is edited in a certain way, you are going to begin to connect parts and sort of create a story. That became like a big discovery for me, in the sense that I didn't have to know in advance what it was going to be about. I could just be there with these materials and things, being present in that moment with these objects, and it of course doesn't happen all the time, but at times it did happen. And I think probably those were the most interesting moments that ended up being in the film. Usually the moments, or if I came in with preconceived ideas or thinking, I'm going to try this out, it rarely sort of worked. And usually those moments where I was surprised after I, watched all the footage again, those were sort of the interesting parts. As I was saying, I came in thinking, okay, I'm going to, sort of combine these two stories, like a human story and a non-human story, and see what happens there. And it didn't work out like that at all. So I'm gonna maybe make a quick parenthesis and tell you a little bit about the story itself for the film. The story of Enuna is the story of a young, late 20s office worker that one day wakes up and sort of out of nowhere decides that she doesn't want to work anymore. She's done going to the office and stays at home and doesn't leave, basically. She's just always there. And as the days go by, the house and all the objects that surround her, that are part of her everyday life, sort of begin to gain space, I guess, like they become louder in a way and more present. And the idea, of course, being, there's some sort of boundary between her and the house and the space that she inhabits that becomes more fluid, more permeable. So that was the main idea. The film failed in its first iteration, meaning I ended up, shooting everything that I thought I needed, and I had done storyboards and script. And by the way, this is the first film that I ever directed, and I had no idea how this was going to play out in reality. So I decided to go in sort of the more conservative way, meaning, I stuck to the production modes of like filmmaking, meaning, although we were in a tight budget and this was a very, very small production, there was someone in charge of the image, there was someone in charge of sound. I had an assistant editor that was helping me, schedule and plan the shoots, etc., etc. So the whole sort of human section of the story of the movie, the human story, was done in this very sort of traditional, in a way, mode. Even though there were some caveats, there were some, exceptions to how we were shooting, because it wasn't all scripted. There were like gaps that I left on purpose to improvise and try things out right there. But for the most part, everything had been planned in advance and talked about and sort of worked on. So I go back to Davis and I start editing, and after some time I begin to notice that I was totally sort of swept away by the human story. Like I had just focused on that and hadn't had any time almost at all to actually shoot the non-human parts. And that was a really interesting find, and of course something that I wasn't expecting. I thought, because I had done these previous exercises and shorts, that I sort of knew, that what is it that I had to do. But what happened is that during the shoot, I ended up, we were shooting like maybe 10 hours a day, every day for like 10 days. And, it piles up after a while, and you're just too tired at the end of the day to, keep shooting these things and objects and things like that. When you are shooting for like a, human-driven story, the way that you're going to shoot and the sort of demands that the story has are very different from the ones that when you're shooting for a non-human part. And again, they're totally different once more when you're shooting for a combined, say, like a human non-human sort of interaction. So I would say now I have those three sort of different categories. To really capture non-human acting, you need a lot of time, and you really don't know what you're doing. And if you are in a sort of production mode or with other people, like say if I had like someone doing sound and someone doing camera, it would be very, very difficult to communicate to them what to do, because I don't know what I'm doing until I'm there with these things, and I just have to be there and do them. I think personally, if you go with a preconceived idea, then again, you're sort of making these things sort of work for you. You are, in a way, projecting all these, again, ideas or emotions or whatever it is. But what I'm trying to do is sort of be present with them and think of them as collaborators, as agents that, not agents, as collaborators, as, other presences that are there, like, and that they have something to add to this. But in order to listen to what they have to add, I can't go in, with knowing what I want to do. again, this is, I say it, but I'm not sure I totally believe it. I mean, I believe part of it, but I also know that many times I've gone with specific things in mind that I sort of forced into them. And this brings me to this other big issue, which is the issue of consent. If you're shooting a human, you have some sort of consent going on, but with non-human actors, there's no language usually, unless you're working with animals, which I still haven't done yet. In films, actors have lines, and those lines represent some kind of agency. Language represents, not represents, it's connected to agency for us as humans. So what happens when you have these things that don't share that same language? They maybe have other languages. So how do you deal with knowing what they want? I have no answer to that. That's it. Thank you.